She called it humiliation. The internet called it justice. Somewhere between those two words stood Karen Madison, 42, retail supervisor. Fluent in policy manuals and weaponized politeness, clutching a narrative she had rehearsed so many times it sounded like scripture. In her telling, she was the victim of a televised ambush, a public scolding that scorched her reputation and cost her the comfortable life she'd arranged like a window display. Neat, themed, and under control. In her telling, the problem wasn't what she had done, it was how it made her look. That distinction would become the hinge on which everything turned. Before the lawsuit, there had been a complaint. Before the complaint, a confrontation. And before the confrontation, a seed. Small, ordinary. The kind that takes root in a person who believes rules exist to protect them and punish everyone else. Karen ran her store like a tiny nation-state. Refunds were foreign treaties. Discounts were border disputes. Employees were citizens until they made a mistake. Then they were insurgents. And customers, they were useful as long as they behaved. The first fracture in her control came with a return. $15 and a receipt smudged by rain. It wasn't the money. It never is. It was the principle, the sacred doctrine that says nothing slips past the sentinel at the counter. Under that doctrine, compassion is an enemy combatant. So when a teenage cashier, new to the job, still learning the choreography of apologies and barcodes, hesitated, Karen stepped in with the choreography she knew best. Words as knives wrapped in smiles, questions delivered like verdicts. The performance was polished. The performative sigh, the precise tap of a manicured finger on the counter. The lecture about standards that implied anyone asking for help was undermining civilization. By the time her speech ended, the boy's hands shook. If anyone watching felt the urge to intervene, Karen had a phrase to swat them silent. Store policy. It was the four-syllable shield she'd learned to raise against humanity. That day birthed two stories. One that lived in Karen's head, and one that lived in reality. In Karen's version, she defended order against chaos and was punished by a television judge who confused empathy with justice. In reality, something simpler happened. Arrogance met accountability, and the latter did not flinch. The judgment on national TV was not a spectacle to humiliate her. It was a mirror. But mirrors are cruel to people who have trained themselves to look away. After the episode aired, the comments found her. They always do. Her phone turned into a weather alert system for consequences. Notifications arriving like thunder. Then hail, then a sky gone green. Coworkers grew distant. A district manager asked for a conversation. The teenager's mother, whose name Karen never bothered to learn, filed a complaint that read less like a grievance and more like a wound. Inside Karen, something fragile began to calcify into a story about persecution. She didn't rethink. She doubled down. She told friends she'd been edited to look bad. She told herself the judge had mocked her work ethic. She told a lawyer she wanted to sue. The lawyer, hungry, confident, fluent in phrases like emotional distress, listened just long enough to sense the publicity. Karen mistook that attention for validation. In late-night drafts on her laptop, she wrote declarations about her professional standing, about the psychic harm of being corrected on television, about losing sleep because strangers online called her behavior by its name. What she never wrote, what she could not write, was an admission of what had started all this. A $15 choice and the pleasure she took in making someone smaller so she could feel bigger. By the time the case was scheduled, she had begun to savor a fantasy, walking into a courtroom not as a defendant, but as a plaintiff seeking revenge draped in legitimacy. She pictured measured words, her own poised dignity, the restoration of a reputation she believed she'd only misplaced. She rehearsed lines in the mirror, smoothing her tone to a credible victim's cadence. Each practice session was another layer of lacquer over the same old wood. But entitlement has a tell. It flinches at questions. It bristles at context. It thinks motives are private property. And when entitlement meets a judge who has seen every variety of performance, its edges show. Karen didn't understand that yet. She believed in a version of law that worked like customer service. Escalate loud enough and someone comped the bill. She believed in a version of truth that could be curated. She believed that if she could control the conversation, she could control the consequences. Still, there was a splinter in her certainty, a nagging memory, brief, easily dismissed, of a lens in the ceiling, red light winking during the argument, the way a co-worker's eyes had traveled upward before meeting hers again. She filed that memory in a drawer labeled irrelevant. She would later call it a trap, but traps only work on people moving in the wrong direction. When she signed the last affidavit, she told herself she had taken back the narrative. She told herself this would teach the judge a lesson about professional respect. She told herself that the internet would finally hear her side. And then, like all stories that have confused attention for proof, hers moved toward the one thing it could not survive: evidence. If you've ever believed that embarrassment is the injury and not the consequence, you might find sympathy in Karen's posture. But look closer. The bruise isn't shame inflicted from outside. It's truth pressing from within. Karen called it humiliation. The internet called it justice. The law would soon call it something else entirely. And long before any ruling was read, a quiet reckoning had already begun. The kind that doesn't need an audience to be real. If accountability matters to you, pause for a breath here and remember this. When you tell yourself the story that hurts least, reality keeps the receipts. The morning of the hearing felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a performance Karen had been waiting her whole life to deliver. She arrived 15 minutes early as if punctuality could disguise insecurity, wearing a beige suit that seemed chosen to whisper professionalism while screaming control. Her lawyer walked beside her carrying a briefcase she insisted on calling a strategy portfolio. Inside were printouts of online comments, screenshots of memes, and one carefully highlighted transcript of the episode she called Exhibit A, Madison versus Common Sense. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors, and Karen stepped inside like a celebrity walking onto a soundstage. The air carried that peculiar silence reserved for anticipation, the audience's quiet expectation that something they weren't supposed to see was about to happen. Camera crews adjusted their angles, technicians whispered into headsets, and somewhere beyond the lights, Judge Judy reviewed her notes with the serene focus of someone who already knew how this story ended. Karen mistook that calm for hesitation. That would be her first mistake. When the case was called, Judy didn't look up immediately. She finished reading the file, closed it with deliberate precision, and only then raised her eyes. The pause was surgical. It told the room that control was not shared here. It was singular. "Madison," she began, her tone steady, clipped, unimpressed. "You're suing this court for emotional distress and reputational harm stemming from your previous televised appearance. Is that correct?" Karen nodded, her lips parting to deliver a prepared speech about dignity and justice. "That is correct, Your Honor," she began, "and I would appreciate being treated with the same level of respect I afford others." The phrasing was perfect in her mind, authoritative, righteous, bulletproof. But Judy's slight raise of an eyebrow was a weather report. A storm was coming. Karen continued, voice steady but rising with the confidence of self-belief, mistaken for strength. "On national television, you humiliated me, mocked my profession, and allowed an audience to laugh at my pain. That's defamation. My career has suffered irreparable damage because of your actions." The gallery murmured, a soft ripple that made the bailiff's head turn. Judy waited until the sound settled, then asked the kind of question that sounds harmless, but draws blood. "Madison, did I instruct you to behave inappropriately during your employment? Did I ask you to insult your staff on live television?" Karen's expression faltered, momentarily unprogrammed. "That's not the point," she said quickly. "The point is that you broadcasted in a misleading way." Judy nodded once, as if noting a specimen under glass. "So, your complaint isn't that you were misrepresented, but that you were represented accurately in public." The sentence hit like a sudden temperature drop. The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer tried to interject, but Judy's gaze silenced him before the word objection could fully form. "Madison," Judy continued, "I've presided over 25,000 cases. You're the first plaintiff who has ever sued me for doing my job correctly." A faint chuckle from the audience, instantly quelled by Judy's glance, punctuated the absurdity of the moment. Karen leaned forward, desperate to recover control. "You think this is funny? You think ruining someone's livelihood is entertainment?" Her tone was sharper now, words trembling on the edge of outrage. "I lost friends. I lost my job. You lost your temper," Judy interrupted, voice low but cutting. "And the world saw it. That's not defamation. That's documentation." The phrase lingered in the air, echoing off wood and marble like a verdict already sealed. Karen's hands tightened around her folder. The attorney whispered something she ignored. She had come expecting a duel and found herself facing an autopsy of her own behavior, her own logic, her own myth. Every argument she rehearsed at home dissolved in the courtroom's fluorescent truth. The more she spoke, the smaller her words became. Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority, when it's real, doesn't shout. By the end of the morning, Karen's posture had wilted into defensiveness. The press scribblers in the back row were already framing the story in their minds. "Woman sues Judge Judy. Instantly regrets it." But Karen, stubborn to the last, clung to her fantasy that the evidence favored her. "I have proof," she said, tapping the folder. "Video proof that shows how this all started." Judy's eyes flickered with quiet amusement. "Proof can be useful," she said evenly, "especially when it plays all the way through." That was the moment the courtroom's atmosphere changed, the invisible tremor before an earthquake. Karen didn't know it yet, but the proof she was so eager to invoke was about to play back in a way she never imagined. And in a courtroom that ran on truth, not sympathy, footage would soon become fate. If you've ever built a case on the belief that perception outweighs reality, take note here. Reality may wait patiently, but when it arrives with receipts. Karen Madison had built her identity on control. Every rule she enforced, every complaint she filed, every apology she refused, each one was a brick in the wall she called professionalism. But now, in Judge Judy's courtroom, that same wall had begun to crack. The cameras captured everything. Her fixed smile, her twitching hands, the subtle tremor in her voice when Judy's question sliced too close to the bone. What she mistook for composure was, in truth, collapse rehearsing itself. The cross-examination began quietly. Judy's tone was conversational, almost kind, the way a surgeon might speak before making the first incision. "Ms. Madison," she said, "you claim emotional distress. Let's talk about what caused it." Karen nodded, feigning confidence. "The ridicule, Your Honor, the laughter. I was portrayed as unstable. The show edited it to make me look angry." "Edited?" Judy repeated softly, as though tasting the word. "Tell me, did you throw the receipt at your employee?" Karen hesitated. "I dropped it. It may have looked. Did you raise your voice?" Judy interrupted. I spoke firmly. It was a misunderstanding. "Did you call your staff incompetent children who should work somewhere with less responsibility? On camera?" Judy's tone never lifted above civility, but every syllable carried the weight of documentation. Karen's lawyer shifted uneasily. "That statement," Karen began, "was taken out of context." Judy nodded slowly, her eyes unblinking. "That's the wonderful thing about context, Ms. Madison. It tends to arrive in full when we let the evidence play. The audience stirred, sensing a shift. For the first time, Karen's certainty began to wobble. Judge Judy gestured toward the clerk. Let's revisit the original incident. I'd like to confirm whether Ms. Madison's distress came from humiliation or from exposure. Karen's lawyer whispered urgently, "We didn't approve the video submission." Judy didn't respond. The clerk placed a small black USB drive on the desk like a detonator. Karen's heart hammered. "That's not admissible," she blurted. "That's private footage." Judy tilted her head. "Private? It happened on your store's premises during business hours, under your own security system. You brought up video evidence, Ms. Madison. Consider this, the rest of it." The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. Karen sat frozen, eyes darting between the screen and the judge. The video began with the calm hum of a normal workday, the register beeping, the door chime jingling. And then her own voice, sharp and venomous, cut through. "You think you can talk back to me? You're lucky I don't have you escorted out right now." The courtroom went silent, except for the audio. In the footage, the teenage cashier stammered an apology, hands trembling. Karen snatched the receipt from his hand and jabbed the air with it like a weapon. "You're a liability to this company. Do you even know what professionalism means?" The video caught her smirk as the boy's eyes welled up. The sound of other customers gasping filled the recording. Back in the courtroom, Karen's face drained of color. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "That wasn't supposed to be public." Judy leaned forward. "You made it public the moment you sued. You asked this court to assess your reputation. I'm simply showing it the way you presented it to the world." Karen tried to speak, but found no words. Her lawyer sat motionless, knowing any objection would be drowned by the footage still rolling. Her pacing behind the counter, her laugh, her final words on the tape. "Let them record me. I have nothing to hide." The monitor went black. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that rewrites everything inside it. Judy folded her hands. "You said the show embarrassed you, Ms. Madison, but embarrassment isn't cruelty. It's honesty reflected back. Sometimes the truth doesn't humiliate us. It just shows what was already there." The audience murmured again, not in laughter this time, but in something closer to awe. Karen sat rigid, as if any movement might trigger another replay. She could feel the shape of her downfall forming in real time, carved not by editing or bias, but by her own voice, her own choices. Ego had become evidence, and evidence never apologizes. Judy finally spoke, her tone quiet, but final. "We'll take a short recess," she said. "When we return, we'll discuss damages if any remain to be discussed." The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like the closing of a door. Karen's reflection lingered faintly on the black screen before her, the only mirror she could not look away from. Pride always believes it can out-talk proof, but proof doesn't argue, it just plays. When the court reconvened after recess, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavier. The light seemed brighter. Every camera operator in the room knew they were witnessing a reckoning unfold frame by frame. Karen returned to her seat, a different person. Still defiant on the outside, but beneath the powder and posture her composure had curdled into panic. Her lawyer's whispered reassurances could not mask the tremor in her hands. For the first time in her adult life, she was not managing the room. She was surviving it. Judge Judy re-entered with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome, but intended to let truth do its full work. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and folded her hands. "Madison," she began, "before we resume, I want to be absolutely clear about something. When you filed this suit, you accused this court of causing you harm. My job today is to determine whether that harm existed or whether it was self-inflicted." Karen's mouth opened, but Judy's raised fingers silenced her before a syllable could escape. "I've listened to your testimony. I've watched the footage, but there's something you may not realize. The evidence you just saw wasn't the only footage obtained." A ripple moved through the gallery. The camera zoomed in. Karen blinked rapidly, her face tightening. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice pitched between disbelief and dread. Judy nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in Exhibit D." A second USB drive appeared, marked with the store's logo and a timestamp. The bailiff inserted it into the monitor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with an image from a different day entirely. The same store, the same counter, but this time, Karen wasn't yelling. She was bragging. The courtroom watched as she leaned across the counter, confiding in another employee. "You know that episode I was on," she said, laughing. "The one with the judge? The internet's obsessed with me. I should sue her just to keep the attention going." She laughed again, loud and sharp. "Publicity is still publicity. People remember the villain more than the victim." Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff turned instinctively toward Judy, whose expression had not changed. "Miss Madison," she said softly, "was that edited too?" Karen's lawyer rose. "Objection! Context!" "Sustained," Judy said, but her tone carried the finality of a verdict. "The context is precisely what's on trial. Let's continue." The video resumed, showing Karen days later rehearsing an interview with a local news reporter. "She thought she could embarrass me on her show," she practiced into the mirror. "But I'll make her pay for it. I've got people who will side with me. No one likes a woman in power tearing down another woman." The hypocrisy rang out louder than any gavel. Karen's voice on the recording sounded proud, unashamed, deliberate. This wasn't a woman broken by humiliation. It was a woman who had turned humiliation into performance and then expected sympathy when the performance was returned to her in full. Strategist plotting revenge and calling it justice. When the screen went dark, Judy leaned back. "So, Miss Madison," she said, "would you like to amend your claim? Or shall we proceed with the version where you filed this lawsuit not because of trauma, but because attention began to fade?" Karen's lips quivered. "That's not how I meant it," she muttered. "I was angry. I was joking." "Anger isn't a defense," Judy replied. "And jokes stop being jokes when they cost people time, money, and integrity." She turned to the clerk. "Please log this as Exhibit D. The record should reflect the plaintiff's statement of motive. Unedited, uninterrupted, and undeniable." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Karen slumped slightly, her earlier arrogance dissolving into visible ache. For years, she had believed that control came from volume, that whoever spoke loudest won. But now, the loudest voice in the room was her own, echoing back through evidence she could not silence. Judy glanced at the audience before delivering the line that would later flood social media feeds. "When you chase attention, you eventually catch accountability." The gavel tapped once, lightly, almost mercifully. "We'll resume closing statements," Judy said. "But I suggest, Ms. Madison, that you consider which part of this story you truly want history to remember." Karen sat motionless as people filed out, her reflection once again caught in the black monitor before her. For the second time that day, she saw herself unfiltered and realized that every performance eventually meets its encore. The trap was never the footage or the judge's questions. The trap was the lie she told herself, that the story would end when she said it did. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived without a single drumbeat of warning. Judge Judy leaned forward, her tone calm but deliberate. "Bailiff," she said, "please exhibit E." Those words rippled through the courtroom like static through an old radio. Karen shifted in her seat, her breathing shallow. Every muscle in her face fought to hold its shape. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering something frantic and useless. There's no strategy left when the evidence starts to breathe. The monitor came to life, filling the courtroom with the grainy glow of surveillance footage. A timestamp blinked in the corner. The store again. Same counter, same fluorescent lights humming with indifference. The camera's perspective was cold, mechanical, without bias, without emotion. It saw everything. And now everyone else would too. Karen appeared on screen mid-conversation with a middle-aged customer. The sound came through next, a clear audio feed from the store's internal system. The woman in the footage was polite, explaining that her purchase had been double-charged. Karen's voice, sharp and brittle, sliced through the air. "That's not possible," she snapped. "You people always say that. Maybe you don't know how credit cards work." The courtroom shifted in their seats. Even without seeing her face, the arrogance in her tone was unmistakable. Judy said nothing. She let the silence fill with revelation. The footage continued. The customer calmly produced a receipt and pointed at the duplicate charge. Karen rolled her eyes. "You think I'm stupid?" she said. "You can't just make up stories and expect to get free money." Then she motioned for the teenage employee to come over. "Show her what real customer service looks like." Her sarcasm drew nervous laughter from another employee off-screen. The customer's shoulders stiffened. "Ma'am," she said softly, "you don't have to be rude." That line, the quiet dignity of it, hung in the air. Karen laughed again. "Oh, I'm rude? I'm the one working. You're the one wasting my time." Then she turned away, dismissing the customer mid-sentence. Back in the courtroom, Karen's lips trembled. The playback continued mercilessly. The video jumped forward a few minutes. A security guard entered the frame, summoned by Karen's gesture. "Escort her out," she ordered. "She's disturbing my staff." The guard hesitated. "She didn't do anything wrong, ma'am." Karen's reply landed like a stone. Verdict: do it anyway. The woman in the footage left the store quietly, her composure intact. Karen, believing the moment had ended, turned to her co-worker and muttered, "That's how you handle idiots." Gasps rippled through the audience. The footage had no music, no edits, no narration. Only truth in real time. Karen pressed her palms against her knees, staring at the floor. She'd wanted a public reckoning. She was getting one. Judge Judy waited until the video ended, then spoke softly. "Madison, do you recall this incident?" Karen swallowed hard. "It looks exaggerated." Judy raised an eyebrow. "Exaggerated? Cameras tend to exaggerate reality by showing it exactly as it happened." Karen's lawyer tried one last objection. "Your Honor, the footage lacks full context." Judy's tone didn't shift. "The context," she said, "is a pattern. This isn't one bad day. This is behavior on repeat. You claim to be humiliated on my show, but humiliation requires innocence. What we're seeing is arrogance unmasked by time and technology." The words landed with the finality of a closing gavel. Karen's eyes filled, but not with remorse, only disbelief that the world had turned so quickly against her. "You don't understand," she whispered almost to herself. "I was under pressure. They provoked me." Judy's gaze softened, but only slightly. "We all face pressure, Miss Madison. Most people meet it with grace. You met it with cruelty. That's not pressure. It's a choice." The courtroom sat silent again. Even the usual shuffling of papers had stopped. Cameras zoomed in on Karen's face, the very image that would later headline every viral clip. Mascara streaking faintly, pride collapsing, truth landing without apology. Judy looked to the clerk. "Please attach Exhibit E to the official record," she said. "It's important that history doesn't lose this moment." Then she turned back to Karen. "Do you still believe this lawsuit is about embarrassment?" Karen hesitated. "It's about respect." Judy nodded slowly. "Then consider this. Respect isn't a right. It's a reflection. What we give, we get. The camera doesn't lie, Miss Madison. It simply holds up the mirror. The gavel struck once. The footage froze on the final frame. Karen's smirk caught mid-sentence. The kind of expression that once meant control, but now meant exposure. The courtroom's silence stretched long after the echo faded. When truth has proof, arrogance becomes history. And when the mirror plays back, there's no pause button for regret. When the final frame of the CCTV froze on screen, the entire courtroom felt suspended in the breath between judgment and consequence. Judge Judy sat still for a long moment, the silence almost ceremonial. Karen stared at the monitor as if refusing to recognize herself in it, as if denial could rewrite evidence. But truth doesn't wait for permission. It stands uninvited and fills every corner. Finally, Judy broke the silence. "Ms. Madison," she said, "you've brought a case built on perception, not on fact. You accuse this court of defaming you, yet what the footage shows is not defamation. It's documentation." The words echoed the same line she had used earlier, but now they landed with absolute weight. Defamation requires falsehood. You gave us the truth, filmed in high definition. Karen swallowed hard. "That video doesn't show who I really am." Her voice trembled. "I was angry. You were yourself," Judy interrupted gently. "And that's precisely why it hurts." The gallery murmured. Reporters leaned forward, sensing history. Karen's lawyer shuffled papers, searching for something to cling to, but every note, every exhibit, every planned rebuttal had turned to dust under the light of unfiltered truth. Judy continued, her tone steady as law itself. "This court finds no merit in your claim. The humiliation you feel was not inflicted by me or by this program. It was born from your own conduct and magnified by your refusal to take responsibility. You did not lose your reputation here today. You revealed it." Karen shook her head, voice breaking. "You can't talk to me like this. I have rights." Judy leaned forward slightly, eyes unwavering. "And you've exercised them, Miss Madison, loudly, publicly, and without restraint. But rights are not shields from consequences. You can sue anyone you wish, but you cannot sue for the truth." The audience gasped softly, a collective exhale of awe and agreement. Judy wasn't angry. She didn't need to be. Her calm was the kind of justice that doesn't shout. It simply arrives. Karen's lawyer made one final attempt. "Your Honor, my client has suffered significant emotional distress from the online reaction to her prior appearance. Surely there must be recourse." Judy turned her gaze on him. "The internet does not punish innocence, counselor. It amplifies reality. Perhaps your client should consider that what went viral was not the editing, but the evidence. Doesn't humiliate us. It just shows what was already there." The audience murmured again, not in laughter this time, but in something closer to awe. Karen sat rigid, as if any movement might trigger another replay. She could feel the shape of her downfall forming in real time, carved not by editing or bias, but by her own voice, her own choices. Ego had become evidence, and evidence never apologizes. Judy finally spoke, her tone quiet but final. "We'll take a short recess," she said. "When we return, we'll discuss damages, if any remain to be discussed." The gavel struck once, and the sound echoed like the closing of a door. Karen's reflection lingered faintly on the black screen before her, the only mirror she could not look away from. Pride always believes it can out-talk proof. But proof doesn't argue. It just plays. When the court reconvened after recess, the atmosphere had shifted. The oxygen felt heavier. The light seemed brighter. Every camera operator in the room knew they were witnessing a reckoning unfold frame by frame. Karen returned to her seat, a different person, still defiant on the outside, but beneath the powder and posture, her composure had curdled into panic. Her lawyer's whispered reassurances couldn't mask the tremor in her hands. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't managing the room. She was surviving it. Judge Judy re-entered with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome, but intended to let truth do its full work. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and folded her hands. "Madison," she began, "before we resume, I want to be absolutely clear about something. When you filed this suit, you accused this court of causing you harm. My job today is to determine whether that harm existed, or whether it was self-inflicted." Karen's mouth opened, but Judy's raised fingers silenced her before a syllable could escape. "I've listened to your testimony. I've watched the footage. But there's something you may not realize. The evidence you just saw wasn't the only footage obtained." A ripple moved through the gallery. Cameras zoomed in. Karen blinked rapidly, her face tightening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice pitched between disbelief and dread. Judy nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in Exhibit D." A second USB drive appeared, marked with the store's logo and a timestamp. The bailiff inserted it into the monitor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with an image from a different day entirely. The same store, the same counter. But this time, Karen wasn't yelling. She was bragging. The courtroom watched as she leaned across the counter, confiding in another employee. "You know that episode I was on?" she said, laughing. "The one with the judge? The internet's obsessed with me. I should sue her just to keep the attention going." She laughed again, loud and sharp. "Publicity is still publicity. People remember the villain more than the victim." Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff turned instinctively toward Judy, whose expression hadn't changed. "Ms. Madison," she said softly, "was that edited too?" Karen's lawyer rose. "Objection. Context." "Sustained," Judy said, but her tone carried the finality of a verdict. "The context is precisely what's on trial. Let's continue." The video resumed, showing Karen days later rehearsing her interview with a local news reporter. "She thought she could embarrass me on her show," Karen said, practicing into the mirror. "But I'll make her pay for it. I've got people who will side with me. No one likes a woman in power tearing down another woman." The hypocrisy rang louder than any gavel. Karen's voice on the recording sounded proud, unashamed, deliberate. This wasn't a woman broken by humiliation. It was a woman fueled by it. The entitlement ended there. Judy faced Karen once more. "Here is the verdict," she said. "The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. No damages are awarded. The court further finds that the plaintiff's conduct constitutes an abuse of judicial resources. Costs will be paid by Ms. Madison in full." The gavel struck once, a single crisp sound that carried more force than shouting ever could. The courtroom erupted into quiet murmurs. Cameras captured every flicker of emotion. Karen didn't move. Her lawyer touched her arm, but she stayed frozen, staring ahead at nothing. For a moment, Judge Judy softened. "Ms. Madison," she said, her voice lower now, almost reflective. "There's something I've learned after all these years behind this bench. People often mistake embarrassment for injustice. They think feeling exposed means they were wronged. But embarrassment is the soul's way of asking us to grow. It's an invitation, not a punishment." Karen blinked through tears. "So what do I do now?" she whispered. Judy tilted her head slightly. "Start with an apology to yourself first, then to those who earned it." That line became the headline of every article, the closing quote in every viral post. "Start with an apology to yourself first." It spread faster than the footage. Within hours, the clip dominated social media. The hashtag #ToddandSewers_apologize first trended worldwide. Karen left the courtroom quietly, her once crisp steps faltering as the crowd parted. The same cameras that had once felt like her audience now followed her exit like a shadow. She didn't look back. Judge Judy gathered her files, closed the folder with practiced calm, and said softly, mostly to herself, "Case dismissed." The audience stood in silent respect, not for spectacle, but for closure. Some verdicts don't end in punishment. They end in revelation. And sometimes, the harshest sentence is simply watching yourself. Unfiltered, undeniable, and true. Outside, the day had turned gray. The kind of sky that feels poetic only to those not living through it. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, lenses hunting for the fallen face of a woman who had once believed the world revolved around her composure. Karen Madison didn't speak. Her lawyer tried to usher her through the crowd, but silence was her only refuge now. Every word risked becoming tomorrow's headline. Within hours, the moment Judy said, "You can't sue the truth," became a global refrain. Reaction videos appeared in dozens of languages. Comment sections became confessionals, filled with people admitting the times they too had confused pride for strength, defiance for dignity. Viral fame didn't destroy Karen. It exposed her. Messages poured in, some cruel, others compassionate. One from her former manager read, "Grace always costs less than ego." At home, the silence was heavier than any verdict. The certificates on the wall, Employee of the Month, Leadership Award, looked less like achievements and more like disguises. A week later, Karen walked into the store she once managed. The young cashier she'd humiliated was now assistant manager. He froze when he saw her. "You probably don't want to see me," she said softly. He shrugged, cautious but kind. "Depends which version of you I'm seeing today." "The one that finally knows what sorry means." She handed him an envelope, a handwritten letter and a small check. "I can't change what I said, but I can try to match the damage I caused." He nodded. "It's not about the money. It's just nice to see someone mean it." For a fleeting moment, something unclenched inside her, a quiet exhale of release. She walked out without looking back, the doorbell chiming like the period at the end of a long, necessary sentence. Months passed. The algorithms moved on, but what stayed was the echo of one line: "Start with an apology to yourself first." It was printed on posters, quoted in sermons, turned into a global mantra. Karen's life didn't collapse. It transformed. She began working at a community center, mediating customer complaints. Irony became atonement. When people recognized her, she didn't hide. "That was me," she'd say. "And that's why I listen now." In a local news interview titled "From Lawsuit to Lesson," the woman who sued Judge Judy learns what justice really means. Karen looked older, calmer, unmasked. "I used to think humiliation was the worst thing that could happen to me," she said. "But it was actually the best. It stripped away everything that wasn't real." The camera caught the faintest smile before fading to black. In the end, the verdict wasn't what broke her. It's what built her. Because sometimes, the courtroom isn't where punishment lives. It's where truth finally meets mercy, and where the echo of accountability becomes the beginning of peace. The television courtroom had never witnessed anything quite like what was about to unfold. When Diane Patterson walked through those doors with her designer handbag and a thick binder labeled evidence, she had no idea she was about to become the most hated woman on the internet. What started as her carefully planned performance to extract $5,000 from an innocent neighbor would end with a single word from Judge Judy that would destroy her reputation forever. We're talking about 47 million views across every platform, trending #1 worldwide, and a moment so satisfying that people would watch it on repeat just to feel that rush of justice being served. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Diane Patterson didn't just interrupt Judge Judy once or twice. She interrupted America's toughest judge 6 times in a row, each interruption more arrogant than the last. And then Judge Judy spoke her seventh word. That final word landed with the force of a nuclear bomb, completely obliterating Diane's lies and exposing her as the fraud she'd been for years. If you're ready to see the most satisfying moment of instant karma ever captured on camera, smash that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that justice still exists. Hit that notification bell, because we're bringing you the most explosive courtroom moments where entitled people learn that respect isn't optional. Meet Diane Patterson, 48 years old, the textbook definition of a professional Karen who had turned complaining into a full-time career. This wasn't some random woman having a bad day. Diane had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of weaponizing the legal system against anyone who dared inconvenience her. The former PTA president asked to resign after trying to ban Halloween. The neighborhood watch captain was removed after filing noise complaints against every household on her street. HOA board members voted out after attempting to fine people for having the wrong shade of white on their window trim. But those positions were just training for her true calling. Diane had discovered how to turn personal disputes into profitable lawsuits, and she had gotten very good at it. Over 5 years, Diane had filed 23 separate lawsuits in small claims courts. 23 times she had played the victim. She'd practiced tears and walked away with settlement money. She sued a hair salon for $1,500, claiming they ruined her hair when they'd simply refused to honor an expired coupon. She sued a dry cleaner for $2,000, claiming they destroyed her dress when they just closed 15 minutes early one day. She sued her employer for $3,500, claiming discrimination when she'd actually been disciplined for chronic tardiness. She even sued her church group for $1,200, claiming emotional distress after they didn't select her for a leadership position. The pattern was crystal clear. Diane would manufacture legal claims designed to extract maximum money while requiring minimum proof, and she had collected over $47,000 doing it. What made Diane dangerous was her complete lack of empathy combined with encyclopedic knowledge of how to game the system. She knew most people would rather pay a few thousand than spend $5,000 on an attorney. She could cry on cue, present herself as vulnerable, and make lies sound plausible enough that busy judges wouldn't dig deeper. But Diane had made one critical error. She had started believing her own performance. She thought she was smarter than everyone, that judges were easy to manipulate, that her acting skills could fool anyone. She had no idea she was about to meet Judge Judy, who had crushed manipulators for 25 years and had seen every trick 1,000 times before. The case seemed simple on the surface. Diane was suing her neighbor Tom Harrison for $5,000, claiming his dog viciously attacked her. But the dog was Mr. Fluffkins, a 12-pound, 14-year-old Pomeranian with severe arthritis who could barely climb 3 steps. The real story had nothing to do with any attack. Tom Harrison was a 72-year-old widowed veteran whose late wife had bought Mr. Fluffkins 6 years earlier, 2 months before her cancer diagnosis. That dog had been by her side through every chemotherapy session, every hospital stay. When she died 3 years ago, Mr. Fluffkins became Tom's last connection to his wife of 48 years. The actual conflict started when Tom's oak tree blocked Diane's sunset view. She demanded he cut it down. Tom politely refused, offering only to trim branches on her property line. Diane decided he needed punishment, so she fabricated a dog attack story. She took photos of scratches she made with her own fingernails, filed a police report days later with no witnesses, created fake therapy records. She wanted the dog taken away, and Tom bankrupted for refusing her demands. But Tom Harrison fought back. Using savings meant for a new roof, he hired a lawyer. He gathered Ring camera footage showing Mr. Fluffkins barely walking on arthritic legs, veterinary statements about the dog's medical conditions making attacks physically impossible, character witnesses from neighbors, and medical expert analysis proving Diane's scratches were self-inflicted. When Judge Judy's producers found this, when the producers discovered Diane's pattern of serial litigation, they found she had filed 23 lawsuits in 5 years. They brought it to Judge Judy, who personally reviewed the materials before the hearing, something she rarely did. She knew exactly what Diane Patterson was, and she was ready. For Tom, this case was about protecting his late wife's final gift. For Diane, it was supposed to be her 24th easy victory. Instead, she was about to experience the most humiliating public destruction of her life, captured on camera for millions to witness. Before we show you how Judge Judy demolished this professional Karen with one devastating word, hit that like button if you're ready to see real justice served. And keep watching, because what's coming will be the most satisfying thing you see all week. The moment Diane Patterson walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, every person in that room could feel the entitled energy radiating off her like heat from asphalt on a summer day. She strutted through those doors like she owned the building, her designer heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of someone who had done this dance many times before and won every single round. She was carrying that massive binder labeled evidence clutched against her chest like a shield, and her face wore the kind of smug confidence that comes from years of manipulating sympathetic judges and intimidating innocent people into settlements. Diane had spent the morning perfecting her appearance in the mirror, choosing an outfit that screamed respectable victim, practicing her expressions of pain and trauma, rehearsing the exact moment when she would let her voice crack for maximum emotional impact. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking into a courtroom run by a woman who had been destroying people exactly like her since before Diane was born. Across from her, Tom Harrison sat quietly in the plaintiff's area, looking exactly like what he was, a 72-year-old widowed veteran who just wanted to protect his late wife's dog and live in peace. His hands were folded in his lap, and tucked into his folder was a photo of Mr. Fluffkins that anyone with eyes could see showed a harmless elderly Pomeranian. The contrast between these two people couldn't have been more stark, and the audience members who had been watching Judge Judy for decades could already sense that something special was brewing. Judge Judy began with her standard opening, her voice carrying that signature tone of authority that had made grown attorneys nervous for decades. "Miss Patterson, you're suing Mr. Harrison for $5,000, claiming his dog attacked you. Tell me what happened." It was a simple question, straightforward and clear, the kind of opening that would allow an honest person to simply state the facts of their case. But Diane Patterson was not an honest person, and she had never in her life simply stated facts when she could instead deliver a theatrical performance. She didn't just answer the question. She launched into what can only be described as a one-woman show that would have made community theater directors cringe. "Your Honor, this man's vicious animal completely destroyed my sense of safety in my own neighborhood," she began, her voice dripping with practiced victimhood. But then she made her first critical mistake. Instead of sticking to what allegedly happened, Diane started editorializing, adding dramatic commentary about Tom's character, rolling her eyes when she mentioned his attempts to downplay the incident, making exaggerated hand gestures that looked like she was performing Shakespeare in the park. "As anyone with common sense would know," she said with condescending emphasis, "a dangerous dog is a liability to the entire community. And obviously, Mr. Harrison has no respect for his neighbor's safety." Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, just a fraction of an inch, but veteran court watchers in the audience recognized it immediately as the first warning sign that trouble was brewing. "Miss Patterson," Judge Judy interrupted, her tone still professional but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "I didn't ask for your analysis of Mr. Harrison's character. I asked, what happened to you?" The courtroom went silent in that particular way that happens right before lightning strikes. That moment of held breath when everyone senses something significant is about to occur. But Diane Patterson, blinded by her own arrogance and years of successful manipulation, completely missed the warning. Instead of backing down, instead of recognizing that she was being corrected by a judge who demanded respect, Diane actually let out an exaggerated sigh. The kind of sigh you reserve for incompetent store clerks or customer service representatives who aren't giving you what you want fast enough. "Well, if you'll let me finish my story, Your Honor," she said with barely concealed irritation. "I was trying to explain the context of why this attack was so traumatic." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Diane Patterson had just sighed at Judge Judy Scheindlin in dismissive frustration. As if the judge was the problem, as if this woman who had presided over tens of thousands of cases was somehow interfering with Diane's perfectly planned performance. The audience members exchanged shocked glances. Even the camera operator seemed to tense up. In all her years of running the courtroom, Judge Judy had dealt with thousands of difficult litigants. But the sheer audacity of someone actually sighing at her in dismissive frustration was something that rarely happened. And, when it did, it never ended well for the person foolish enough to do it. Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair. Judge Judy's famous steely gaze, locked onto Diane like a heat-seeking missile finding its target. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that made seasoned attorneys break out in cold sweats. "Did you just sigh at me in my courtroom?" The question hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. And this was the moment when any reasonable person would have recognized the danger they were in, would have apologized immediately, would have adjusted their attitude and approach. But Diane Patterson was not a reasonable person. She was a woman who had spent years believing her own performance, convinced that her manipulation skills were foolproof, certain that she could charm or intimidate her way through any situation. And incredibly, impossibly, stupidly, Diane seemed to think this was still going according to her plan. She actually smirked. Not just a little smile, but a full-blown condescending smirk that screamed, "I can't believe I have to deal with this incompetent person." She even turned slightly toward the audience, as if she were about to share an inside joke with them about how unreasonable this judge was being, as if the people watching were going to be on her side against Judge Judy. What Diane didn't understand, what her arrogance and entitlement had completely blinded her to, was that she had just lit the fuse on a legal bomb that was about to explode directly in her face. And Judge Judy was simply waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. Judge Judy's response to Diane's smirk was swift and surgical, delivered with the precision of a master craftsman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Miss Patterson, let me save us all some time here," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel through tissue. "Based on the evidence you've presented, which is virtually nothing, and your attitude in my courtroom, which is absolutely unacceptable, I need to ask you one very simple question before we go any further." The entire courtroom leaned forward collectively, sensing that something monumental was building. Diane sat up slightly straighter in her chair, clearly believing that she was about to have an opportunity to deliver more of her practiced victim performance, still somehow convinced that her manipulation tactics were working. Tom Harrison sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe, watching this woman who had tormented him for months finally face someone who wasn't afraid of her threats or intimidated by her aggressive legal tactics. Judge Judy opened the folder in front of her with deliberate slowness, making sure every camera angle captured the moment. Then she looked directly into Diane Patterson's eyes with the kind of stare that had made criminals confess and liars break down for decades. "Miss Patterson, I'm going to ask you a yes or no question, and I want a one-word answer. Do you understand me?" One word, yes or no. Diane nodded, that smirk still playing at the corners of her mouth, clearly thinking she could navigate whatever trap she imagined was being set. Judge Judy's voice became even quieter, even more controlled. The kind of calm that comes right before a hurricane makes landfall. Did your neighbor's dog actually attack you? Yes or no? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade suspended over Diane's neck. It was the simplest possible question, binary and clear, requiring only a single-word response. But for Diane Patterson, a woman who had built her entire fraudulent empire on elaborate stories and emotional manipulation, the idea of answering with just yes or no was apparently impossible. Her face went through a series of visible calculations, her eyes darting around the room as her brain tried to figure out the best angle to play. She knew she was trapped because a simple yes would be an obvious lie that Judge Judy clearly had evidence to contradict. But saying no would mean admitting her entire case was fabricated. So Diane did what manipulators always do when cornered. She tried to blur the lines, to create confusion, to avoid direct accountability. Her mouth opened and the words started to come out. Well, that depends on your definition of attack, Your Honor. Because what I experienced was... She never got to finish that sentence. Judge Judy leaned forward and spoke one single word that would destroy Diane Patterson's life forever. Liar. The word wasn't yelled or screamed. It wasn't delivered with emotion or anger. Judge Judy stated it as a simple, undeniable fact. The same way you might observe that the sky is blue or that water is wet. Just one word, spoken with absolute certainty and devastating clarity. Liar. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Diane's face transformed in real time, cycling through shock, then flushing red with anger, then draining to a pale white as the reality of what was happening crashed down on her. That single word hung in the air like a death sentence, and Judge Judy wasn't even close to finished. You fabricated this entire story because your neighbor wouldn't cut down his tree to improve your view, Judge Judy continued, her voice remaining calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You took photographs of scratches that you inflicted on yourself with your own fingernails. You weaponized my courtroom and the legal system for personal revenge against a 72-year-old widowed veteran, whose only crime was refusing to destroy a 50-year-old tree to satisfy your entitled demands. And you wasted everyone's time with this theatrical performance that might have worked on other judges, but it doesn't work here. Each sentence landed on Diane like a physical blow, and the cameras captured every second of her facade crumbling in real time. She tried to interrupt, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, but no words would come out. Her carefully constructed victim narrative was being demolished brick by brick in front of millions of viewers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Judge Judy held up a still frame from Tom's Ring camera footage, the image showing Mr. Fluffkins barely standing on arthritic legs, clearly struggling just to walk down 3 small steps. This is your vicious beast, Miss Patterson. This 14-year-old Pomeranian with severe arthritis who can barely climb stairs. This is the animal you claim attacked you so violently that you needed therapy and $5,000 in damages? The sarcasm in Judge Judy's voice was withering, stripping away every last shred of Diane's credibility. But Judge Judy still wasn't done, because she had done something she rarely did. She had personally researched Diane Patterson's background, and what she had found was about to be exposed to the world. Let's talk about your history, Miss Patterson, because I think it's very relevant to your credibility in this courtroom, Judge Judy said, pulling out another document. 23 lawsuits filed in the past 5 years. 23 separate occasions where you've stood before a judge claiming to be a victim of someone else's negligence or malice. Hair salon, dry cleaner, former employer, church group, neighbors, small business owners. Every single lawsuit filed after you had a personal dispute with the defendant. Every single case designed to extract a few thousand from people who couldn't afford to fight you properly. The audience was completely silent now, stunned by the pattern being revealed. You've collected over $47,000 in settlements and judgments. Miss Patterson, you've turned litigation into a weapon and victimhood into a profession. You're not a victim. You're a predator who exploits the legal system to punish anyone who doesn't give you exactly what you want. Diane was visibly shaking now. All her arrogance and confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning horror of someone realizing their entire con had been exposed on national television. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair and delivered her ruling with finality. Case dismissed. You get nothing, Miss Patterson. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Harrison $5,000 for malicious prosecution. You came into my courtroom with lies. You wasted everyone's time, and now you're going to pay for it. I'm also recommending this case to the district attorney for potential perjury charges, and I'm forwarding your litigation history to the state bar for investigation into abuse of the legal system. The gavel came down with the sound of absolute justice, and Diane Patterson's reign of terror was over. The moment Judge Judy's gavel hit the bench with that final decisive crack, the energy in the courtroom shifted so dramatically that you could almost feel the air pressure change. Diane Patterson stood frozen at the defendant's table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, unable to process that her 24th attempt at litigation fraud had just blown up in her face in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. Tom Harrison sat quietly in his chair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Not tears of victory or celebration, but tears of pure relief that his late wife's dog was finally safe from this woman's lies. The audience members, who had been holding their collective breath during Judge Judy's devastating takedown, began to applaud spontaneously, something that rarely happened in Judge Judy's courtroom because she typically demanded absolute silence and order. But for exactly a few seconds, Judge Judy allowed the applause to continue, a tacit acknowledgement that justice had been served in a way that resonated beyond just this single case. Then her hand went up, and silence returned immediately because even in moments of victory, her courtroom operated by her rules and her rules alone. Diane tried to gather her evidence binder with trembling hands, but her coordination had completely abandoned her in the shock of her public destruction. Papers spilled everywhere, scattering across the floor in a visual metaphor for her entire case falling apart. Her carefully staged photographs of fake scratches, her printed internet articles about dog attacks, her manufactured therapy records, all of it spread across the courtroom floor, like the garbage it had always been. Tom quietly stood and approached Judge Judy's bench, his voice breaking with emotion as he thanked her for seeing through Diane's lies and protecting Mr. Fluffkins. He pulled out a photograph from his folder, a picture of his late wife holding the Pomeranian puppy on the day they brought him home, both of them smiling with the kind of pure joy that comes from simple moments of love. Judge Judy's expression softened for just a moment as she looked at the photo, a rare glimpse of the human compassion behind her tough exterior, and she told Tom that his wife would be proud of him for fighting back against a bully. Diane attempted to approach Tom, possibly to threaten him one final time, or to continue her manipulation even in defeat. But the bailiff stepped between them immediately with a firm hand raised. "Miss Patterson, gather your belongings and leave this courtroom now," he said, with the kind of authority that left no room for argument. Diane's exit was captured from multiple camera angles, and it was the complete opposite of her confident entrance just half an hour earlier. She walked out with her head down, mascara running down her face in dark streaks, papers clutched haphazardly to her chest, looking like someone who had just watched their entire world collapse. Within a couple of hours of the episode airing, the internet absolutely exploded with clips, reactions, and commentary about what would instantly become known as the liar moment. The short clip of Judge Judy leaning forward and stating that single devastating word began spreading across every social media platform like wildfire. On Twitter, the hashtag Karen vs. Judge Judy was trending #1 worldwide within an hour and a half, with over 3 million tweets sharing the clip and celebrating the instant karma. On TikTok, the moment spawned countless reaction videos with creators filming themselves watching Diane's destruction for the first time, their faces going through shock, satisfaction, and pure joy as Judge Judy demolished the fraudulent claims. The original clip accumulated over 30 million views across all the reaction videos combined in just the first day. Reddit communities like Justice Served and FU, Karen had the courtroom video pinned to the top of their pages, with comment threads thousands deep, analyzing every moment of Diane's performance and Judge Judy's systematic destruction of her lies. YouTube commentary channels created deep dive videos breaking down the case, examining Diane's body language, discussing the psychology of serial litigators, and praising Judge Judy's investigative work in uncovering the pattern of fraudulent lawsuits. The video reached 47 million total views across all platforms within the first week, making it the most viral courtroom moment in television history. But the viral spread wasn't just people enjoying the drama. Something deeper was resonating with viewers around the world. Legal commentators began discussing the epidemic of frivolous lawsuits in America, using Diane's case as the perfect example of how the system gets abused. News networks picked up the story, interviewing small claims court judges who confirmed that people like Diane Patterson were a real problem, clogging up court systems with manufactured claims while legitimate cases got delayed. Public records journalists started digging into Diane's 23 previous lawsuits, and they began contacting her victims to tell their stories. One by one, small business owners and individuals came forward with their experiences of being targeted by Diane. A hair salon owner explained how Diane's lawsuit had nearly bankrupted her family business, even though they settled just to avoid higher legal fees. An elderly man described how Diane sued him over a property dispute, and he paid her $2,000 because he couldn't handle the stress of fighting her at his age. A single mother talked about how Diane's fraudulent claim against her had drained her savings and caused her to lose sleep for months, worrying about losing everything. The pattern became undeniable, and public sympathy for Diane evaporated completely as people realized she had been terrorizing innocent people for years. The response from the online community went beyond just sharing videos. Someone created a GoFundMe for Tom Harrison without his knowledge or permission, simply titled, "Help the Veteran Who Stood Up to Karen." The fundraiser explained Tom's situation, how he had used his roof repair savings to hire a lawyer to protect his late wife's dog, how he was living on a fixed income, and how he represented everyone who had ever been bullied by someone like Diane Patterson. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 days, the GoFundMe had raised over $45,000 from people around the world who wanted to support someone who had finally fought back against a serial litigator and won. Contributors left comments sharing their own experiences with frivolous lawsuits, expressing gratitude that Tom had the courage to fight instead of settling and celebrating that justice had finally been served. Tom was initially uncomfortable with the attention and the money, but his neighbors and the GoFundMe organizers convinced him to accept it, explaining that he had become a symbol of standing up to bullies and that people genuinely wanted to help him after everything he'd been through. A few months after the episode aired, Judge Judy sat down for an interview with a legal podcast to discuss the case that had become a cultural phenomenon. And what she revealed about her approach to the Diane Patterson case gave millions of viewers an even deeper appreciation for the methodical takedown they had witnessed. Judge Judy explained that the moment she reviewed Diane's file during her pre-trial preparation, she knew exactly what kind of person she was dealing with because the pattern was so clear and so familiar from her decades on the bench. "People like Diane Patterson are why I do what I do," Judge Judy said with characteristic bluntness. "They exploit the compassion built into our legal system. They weaponize victimhood against innocent people, and they count on everyone being too tired, too scared, or too broke to fight back properly. But when they walk into my courtroom, that game ends immediately." She revealed that calling Diane a liar so directly and plainly wasn't an emotional reaction, but a calculated decision based on 30 years of experience dealing with manipulators. "The worst thing you can do with someone like her is dance around the truth or soften your language to be polite," Judge Judy explained. "They interpret politeness as weakness and any hesitation as an opportunity to continue manipulating. Sometimes people need to hear the truth stated plainly and clearly, without sugarcoating, without room for interpretation. She was lying. That's a fact, so I called her a liar. Simple as that." Judge Judy also discussed the 6 interruptions that led to that 7th word, explaining that each interruption was actually Diane Patterson digging her own grave deeper while believing she was asserting dominance. "I gave her 6 opportunities to show respect, to stop performing, to simply answer questions honestly," Judge Judy said. "Each time she interrupted me, she was telling me and everyone watching that she believed the rules didn't apply to her, that she was smarter than everyone else, that she could manipulate her way through my courtroom just like she'd done in 23 previous cases. I let her continue because I wanted her to expose herself completely, to remove any doubt about what kind of person she was. By the time I asked her that final yes or no question, she had already destroyed any credibility she might have had. And everyone watching knew she was about to lie again. That's when I stopped the performance permanently." The interviewer asked Judge Judy if she had any concerns about calling someone a liar so directly on national television, and her response was pure Judge Judy. "I have zero concerns about telling the truth. Diane Patterson is a liar. That's not an opinion. That's a fact supported by evidence. She lied about a dog attack. She lied in her court filings. She lied to my face when I asked her a direct question. If people don't want to be called liars on television, here's a simple solution. Don't lie in my courtroom." The impact of the case extended far beyond viral videos and internet fame, creating real legislative change in multiple states across the country. Within 6 months of the episode airing, 3 states had introduced bills nicknamed Diane's Law that specifically targeted frivolous litigation and serial lawsuit filers. The proposed legislation included mandatory sanctions for plaintiffs whose claims were proven to be fabricated. A 3 strikes rule where people who filed multiple fraudulent cases would face increasing penalties and restrictions, required bond posting for anyone with a history of questionable lawsuits, and automatic attorney fee awards for defendants who successfully proved malicious prosecution. Legal reform advocates used the Judge Judy case as their primary example when testifying before state legislatures, showing the viral video to lawmakers and explaining that Diane Patterson represented a real problem that was clogging court systems and destroying innocent people's lives. Small claims court judges across the country reported that they started using the case as a teaching tool in their courtrooms, sometimes showing the video to litigants whose claims seemed suspicious, and explaining that fraudulent cases would be investigated and punished. The phrase, "This isn't Judge Judy's courtroom," became judicial, shorthand for warning litigants that lies would be exposed and accountability would be enforced, regardless of how sympathetic someone tried to appear. Legal aid organizations began using the Tom Harrison case as an example in their training programs, teaching people how to recognize malicious prosecution and encouraging victims of frivolous lawsuits to fight back rather than automatically settling. They created resource guides specifically addressing serial litigators, explaining the warning signs that someone was weaponizing the court system, documenting patterns of behavior, and providing templates for counterclaims and malicious prosecution cases. The impact was measurable. Statistics from multiple states showed a documented decline in nuisance lawsuits in the year following the episode, with court administrators reporting that some serial filers had simply stopped filing cases altogether. Insurance companies changed their settlement policies based on the attention the case brought to fraudulent claims, becoming more willing to fight dubious cases rather than automatically settling to avoid legal fees. Defense attorneys reported that they were winning more cases against questionable plaintiffs because juries had seen the Judge Judy video and were more skeptical of victim narratives that seemed performative or inconsistent. The case had fundamentally shifted the cultural conversation around frivolous litigation, and Diane Patterson had accidentally become the poster child for everything wrong with lawsuit abuse. Beyond the legal system, the case achieved something even more significant. It became a cultural touchstone representing accountability in an era where many people felt that entitled behavior went unpunished and consequences were optional for those willing to play victim loudly enough. The single word liar became shorthand in internet culture for calling out dishonesty plainly and directly without apology. Memes featuring Judge Judy's face and that one word spread across every platform, used whenever someone was caught in an obvious lie or exposed for manipulative behavior. The moment represented something people desperately wanted to see more of in their daily lives. Authority figures willing to speak truth directly, consequences for deceit, and justice that didn't flinch. She revealed that calling Diane a liar wasn't an emotional reaction, but a deliberate act grounded in 30 years of experience dealing with manipulators. The worst thing you can do with someone like her is dance around the truth or soften your language to be polite, Judge Judy said. They interpret politeness as weakness and any hesitation as an opportunity to continue manipulating. Sometimes people need to hear the truth plainly and clearly, without sugarcoating, without room for interpretation. She was lying. That's a fact. So I called her a liar. Simple as that. Judge Judy went on to explain that the 6 interruptions leading up to that single word were all self-inflicted wounds by Diane Patterson. I gave her 6 opportunities to show respect, to stop performing, to simply answer honestly, Judy said. Each interruption told everyone watching that she believed the rules didn't apply to her, that she was smarter than everyone else, that she could manipulate her way through my courtroom. I let her continue so she could expose herself completely. By the time I asked that final yes or no question, she'd already destroyed any credibility she had left. Everyone knew she was about to lie again. That's when I ended the performance, permanently. When asked if she had any concerns about calling someone a liar so bluntly on national television, Judge Judy didn't hesitate. I have 0 concerns about telling the truth. Diane Patterson is a liar. That's not an opinion. It's a fact supported by evidence. She lied about a dog attack. She lied in her court filings. She lied to my face when I asked her a direct question. If people don't want to be called liars on television, here's the solution. Don't lie in my courtroom. The case's aftermath extended far beyond viral fame. Within 6 months, 3 states had introduced Diane's Law, legislation targeting frivolous lawsuits and serial litigators. The bills proposed sanctions for fabricated claims, a 3 strikes rule for repeat offenders, mandatory bonds for known abusers of the court system, and automatic attorney fee awards for those wrongly sued. Legal reform advocates showcased the viral video in hearings, arguing that Diane Patterson represented a widespread problem that was wasting court resources and destroying lives. Small claims judges began referencing the case as a teaching tool, even showing clips to litigants as a warning. The phrase, This isn't Judge Judy's courtroom became shorthand for lies will be exposed and consequences are real. The ripple effect was massive. Legal aid groups developed resources to help victims of frivolous lawsuits fight back. States saw measurable declines in nuisance suits. Insurance companies toughened their stances on suspicious claims. Even juries became more skeptical of manipulative victim narratives. Diane Patterson had unintentionally become the face of lawsuit abuse, and the downfall of that system began with one word: liar. But the story didn't end there. Psychologists later explained why millions found the video so satisfying. It spoke to a universal frustration. People felt surrounded by dishonesty and manipulation, and they longed to see truth triumph, even once. Tom Harrison, the man Diane had falsely accused, saw his life change dramatically. The public support helped him pay off his wife's medical bills, care for his elderly dog, Mr. Fluffkins, and rebuild his home. His neighbors even threw a celebration for him, where dozens of people and their dogs came to meet the most famous Pomeranian in America. Tom told reporters, holding a photo of his late wife, "She always told me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. She'd be proud that I didn't let a bully win." He framed Judge Judy's ruling and hung it in his living room, not as a trophy, but as proof that truth matters. Diane's fate, however, was starkly different. She lost her job, her reputation, and eventually her name. Public backlash forced her offline and out of state. Former victims began seeking legal recourse. Though she avoided criminal charges, her career and credibility were destroyed. 5 years later, under a new name, she has not filed a single lawsuit. A silence louder than any apology. Judge Judy later said the case reminded her why she never softened her approach. "Accountability isn't cruelty, it's justice," she told an interviewer. "Sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is tell someone the unvarnished truth about their behavior." Today, that 7-word takedown has become more than a viral clip. It's a cultural landmark, a moment where millions witnessed what justice looks like when it's fearless and fair. The image of Judge Judy leaning forward, saying one devastating word, liar, remains etched in internet history. It taught people that truth still matters, that bullies can be stopped, and that real authority doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. In Judge Judy's world, and in life, you can interrupt once, you can interrupt twice. But by the 7th word, the truth is coming out, whether you're ready or not.